Mitch, you are an holistic coach, a breakthrough facilitator, and inspire people to reclaim their health, maximize healing, and live an inspired life. Thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, Mitch, it actually comes at a really funny time. I have actually just spent the week sick with COVID. So, it's actually quite funny for me because the reason I wanted to get you on the show is I have been seeing a lot online and I have been really interested by something, and it's that viruses don't exist. And this is something you've spoken about. And I find myself really drawn to reading into things and learning about things that are a little bit quote unquote controversial, a little bit different. And when I go to talk to people and talk about that, it's just one of those things that it's just like, but how? Like it's like the gymnastics in the brain goes off,
Mm.
and we just can't get head around how is this right? So, can you please explain the whole theory behind viruses not existing?
So first of all, I just want to say a couple of things to lay the groundwork, just so for your listeners, just to systematically bring things on, so when they're listening to things, it feels structured. I'm laying the foundation and giving a bit of insight before I go into things. Number one, this is not my work, so don't shoot the messenger. Number two is when I first heard of this, even though I knew there was some fishy things going on about the whole idea of eating a bat soup and shutting the world down. Can you remember that one? That was a bit weird. So even though I had my speculations there, it wasn't as a far reach as there's no such thing as viruses. Even to me, that sounded insane because I took more of a traditional scientific route. My background's in nutritional sciences. I have pretty, skeptical mind, you might say, show me the evidence type thing. So this wasn't just a whole bunch of, it just sounds like a whim and it's contrarian and I'm a contrarian. So I love to go against the grain and just say these things for the sake of, stirring up the pot. It took me at least a good 3 years of painstaking research, talking to doctors and scientists and reading literature, learning how to read literature, because at the time I had a very basic understanding. So this whole journey for me was a big learning process. By no means am I saying I'm an expert. I'm willing to change my mind tomorrow. I have no stake in the outcome. And I think that's the thing to ask people is, what's their vested interest? I'm not selling any other thing to say, buy my spike protein detox course because viruses don't exist. But, I have no dog in the fight. So I don't care if viruses exist or not. I just want to make that really, really clear. And it's more for people to put their neck out and say these types of things. Because if anything, it's worse for my professional career. It's worse for me to say these types of things because of the backlash. So believe when I say I have no stake in the outcome. And if the people that I work with, because again, it's not my work, the people that I work with or work alongside or speak to and converse with, if new data comes through that says, oops, we made a mistake, viruses do exist, I'll be the first to put my hand up. So I just want to start with that. I'm not married to this. I'm not tied to this. It took me a lot to change my mind. So, where do we start? There's quite a bit here. We put the whole podcast we could do on just the testing alone. But very simplistically, even your listeners will understand, if you want to find out how anything works in the universe, we have to do science. That's fair to say. You have a hypothesis, you observe something in nature, you want to verify a claim because the claim is that viruses exist. They are these actual physical entities that you find in the universe or on planet Earth. They're these microscopic, replicate competent, protein envelope wrapped genetic pieces of material that basically get inside a cell or a host, they replicate and they take over and they cause illness. And that's the claim. And just specifically to SARS-CoV-2 or the COVID, because we could go into herpes, we could go into all viruses, but let's just keep it simple for conversation's sake. So the claim is that a virus called SARS-CoV-2 exists. It's an actual physical entity and it causes COVID, the illness with a set of symptoms called COVID. That's the claim. So in order to verify that claim, you first have to acquire what's called the independent variable, which is the virus. It's like if I said Bigfoot existed, I can't just give you a bunch of fur and say, there you go, Bigfoot exists. I have to take Bigfoot out of the environment or have some sort of evidence there's this thing called Bigfoot or a unicorn. So naturally, if you want to say that Bigfoot exists or unicorns exist, you'd have to go, well, where do they exist in nature? Where have I observed them? You go into their environment. And in this case, you'd say, well, where do viruses exist? And how would we get this viral particle, this viral entity out of a human being to show it first exists? I'm not even getting to the contagion part yet, but to show it exists. And I think common sense to anyone, you don't have to be a virologist, you don't have to be a doctor, you don't have to be have any professional background to probably appreciate that if you were just using basic common sense, anyone that would be looking to isolate, separate from everything else and isolate just the virus, that you would take it from some sample of human fluid, whether that was blood or lymph, some sort of sputum, mucus. You could use urine. Sperm, semen, maybe we could just take some bodily fluid. If we said this, if this was riddled throughout the body and someone's presenting with symptoms, basic common first step sense would say, let's go find it in the fluids. No such study exists. And that's not coming from me. That's coming from direct from virologists. Even they agree with that. There is no, because if you search PubMed or the Cochrane database or British Medical Journal or the New England Journal of Medicine or anywhere on PubMed, the isolation of SARS-CoV-2, you'll find, I think, about over 200,000 results. But every virologist, every mainstream virologist agrees that no parts of any one of those isolated pieces of literature have got the virus directly from the host, have got the virus directly from the fluids of a sick host. That's not how they isolate it. So that's the first common sense. I think, would you think that's the basic common sense? If you're going to say, so this virus is present, let's go get some mucus and go find the virus in the mucus, right? That to me would be a basic step one common sense to ensure I've isolated the virus. Now I can study it. I can look at its genetic material. I can write the genome. I can study it, look at its morphology, like look how it expresses itself. And then we can look at how it functions, how it behaves, doing other experiments. But just to discover the virus, because the claim is it exists. I think that's just basic common sense. So that's step one. I want to make that really, really clear. That's what you would think we would do in a scientific experiment, which, by the way, we do with microorganisms. We've done that with bacteria. That's certainly true, or any other microscopic particle. So that's what scientists do. Virologists don't do that. And they agree they don't do that. That's not how they actually isolate a virus. So then the question might become, well, how do they isolate a virus? And more or less, if you were to look at basically every single one, more or less, I can't speculate for these 200,000 papers. I haven't read that, so that would be a ridiculous claim. But the team of at least, probably counting now, a good 40 to 50 doctors and scientists and virologists who do look at the literature that I get this information from, had looked through thousands, and I mean thousands of these papers. And they all say the same thing, which is if you actually go to the methods section, which is how did these scientists do the experiment? How did they get the title isolates of SARS-CoV-2? How do they actually come to that conclusion that they've isolated the virus? If you go to the methods section, this is where I call it the funnies. Some people might call it quackery. You can call it whatever you want. How they actually find the virus, how they basically make the claim that it exists. And here's what they do. More or less, and I'm probably going to butcher some of the finer details, but more or less, I'll get the meat and potatoes out. They'll take the sputum. They'll take your snot or cough some sort of sputum from the lungs, or they'll get some mucus from the sinus cavities. And they will take out the large particles. So they'll probably spin it first and purify the large debris. And then they'll put it through a centrifugal process. They'll be spinning it at high speed, sometimes in what's called a glucose medium. So they're basically a sugar medium. And they'll spin it at a certain speed, and they'll have these bands that collect particles at certain sizes. And because we know roughly where the bands, the particle size will land, they can say, well, we believe the virus is this big. It might be, 200 nanometers or 50 nanometers. They can detect exactly where those particles will end up due to the way that they spin this fluid. So they're basically separating everything out except these particles that they've presumed as a virus. So we don't actually know if the virus exists yet. They're presuming that the virus is in there. Because again, if you haven't seen it directly, how do you know what you're working with unless it's observed in nature? So there's already a presumption. There actually is no independent variable. So they then take that band of the particles that they've separated out and they inoculate what's called a cell culture. And the cells that they use more often than not are monkey kidney cells. So they're basically taking that band, those particles, and inoculating it onto a cell line or cell culture, a petri dish. And the specific type of cells they normally use are monkey kidney cells. But then the funny part is the part of the experiment to now try and find the isolation of this virus, in particular SARS-CoV-2, is they first starve the cell culture. They give what's called minimum nutrient feeding. Sometimes called MNF, minimum nutrient feeding. So they're basically starving the cell and stressing it, but just enough to keep it alive. They give it fetal bovine serum, They give it antimycotics and antibiotics. So gentamicin is the typical one, or amphotericin B, which, by the way, are nephrotoxic antibiotics. So they're toxic to kidney tissue. And I just made a point that they use monkey kidney cells. So they're giving them an antibiotic and an antimycotic, an antifungal and antibiotic to nephrotoxic cells. They have that effect. It's known in the literature that those types of antibiotics are toxic to those, so they insult the type of cells. They stress them. Then when they do that, after a certain few days, they observe it. And I'm sure they do other things, but that's the basics of what they do. Then they observe it after 2, 3, 4, 5 days and see what happens to the cell. And eventually it breaks down. It's called the cytopathic effect. And so in order to capture an image of that, what they then have to do is they have to heat it and freeze it. They have to do both from my understanding. They have to stain it with heavy metals, and then they slice it to get one part of the cell culture, and they put it under an electron microscope and have to beam it with electrons to get a still image. And so when you see the images now on this study where it says this is the isolation of SARS-CoV-2, and they look at the cell and what buds out, these little priming particles, they call that the virus. That's how virologists isolate viruses. And then they'll say, we did a mock infection, which is a control, because how do you know, again, if I'm just thinking common sense, how do you know that every step I just mentioned, from starving and stressing the cell, we all know that we get pretty crazy when us human beings are starving, right? We do pretty crazy things. How do you know that starving a cell, giving it fetal bovine serum, giving it antimycotics, antibiotics, heating it, cooling it, staining it, and then blasting it with a bunch of electrons? How do you know that the experiment itself didn't cause the image that you're basically taking? And so they'll say, well, we run a control. It's called a mock infection. But then you actually press, whether it's the Doherty Institute or the Robert Koch Institute or the WHO, because Christine Massey, she's been brilliant. She's basically contacted every Commonwealth government around the world and said, what did you do for the controls? And everyone seems to ignore her. They don't tell you the actual steps to ensure that every single step, you ask any analytical chemist, they will say every single step of a scientific experiment has to be controlled for, because then how do you not know that the experiment itself didn't produce the result? And how do you not know that every single one of those steps I just mentioned didn't result in the picture that you get from the electron microscope? And now these particles, they come budding out from the cell. How do you know the experiment itself didn't do that? They don't tell you. They either ignore, they say we don't have that, we don't have that information, we can't give that information. It's already a big red flag there. Now, there's a great virologist, Stefan Lanka, who went a bit rogue. He said, something's up. He kind of cottoned on. This is kind of weird. And so he ended up funding a private research institute and did multiple controlled studies of this exact thing. He said, I'm going to start without a viral culture, meaning there's no sputum, there's no mucus, there's no nothing. No possible, I'm going to start with sterile monkey kidney cells, run just an exact same experiment with, I think he did yeast, inoculate a cell, no viral content, and he showed he got the exact same result. He got basically these viral particles that looked identical to what virologists are saying are viral particles. There's also a guy, John Enders, I think it was 1953 or 1954. He also did this experiment with the so-called measles virus. Now, it was some of the people that argue this, they said it's a small sample size, but it's just making the same point. He actually did that because prior to that, they didn't run the proper controls. He ran the proper controls. I think it was, again, 1953 or 1954. And cut a long story short, he took individuals that had so-called measles, took their sputum or their mucus, ran the same experiment, did the sucrose gradient, centrifuge it, spun it out, isolate, what we called isolate, presumed it was an isolation, put it into the cell culture, did the fetal bovine syrup, did the antimycotics, antibiotics, and then he did a control with the exact same experiment conditions with no viral particle, no so-called measles. He got the exact same result. And his conclusion in the paper said, I have no idea what measles is because I just got the exact same result. Viral intake or not, I got the exact same result. So he wasn't sure that even measles virus exists. He questioned it after that. Anyway, the whole thing got rugged under, basically. I think he won a Nobel Prize the year later. And what I'm hearing is he just got told to shut up and get on with it, not say a thing. There's also interviews with Luc Montagnier. He's passed away now. He's one of the godfathers of so-called virology. And he was pressed. Well, what's the purpose of isolation? Why do you not just isolate directly? And he just stutters on camera. He's a French guy. And then there was Professor Baltimore, I think from UCLA or somewhere in California. He was pressed the same about the isolation because every other ology of science isolates properly, which is to separate everything from everything else, except virology. It's the only scientific, so-called ology and field of science that doesn't isolate the way that every other department of science does. And he was pressed, and you can see him on camera. He starts to get angry. He goes, "Why are you asking me? Go ask someone else. Go ask this guy." Couldn't even answer basic questions. So when I started to look at all this stuff, I just saying, man, all these red flags are really lining up. There's something behind this. And then I found the work of Christine Massey and Dr. Sam Bailey, Dr. Mark Bailey, Dr. Tom Cowan, Dr. Andrew Kaufman, Mike Stone. These are just brilliant guys. You can look at any of their stuff. Most of it's off YouTube now for, you can imagine why. But you can find their stuff on a deep Google search or BitChute. They host a lot of their videos. And Tom explains this way better than I do. I'm just giving you guys the basics and some of your listeners the basics. He explains this way better than I do.
This is the
He gives really
basics.
simple examples. Well, he just, he's done this for so long now. The way that he explains it is just, he's really, really polished away. So, because he's done this at least 20,000 plus hours, probably 30,000. He went back all the way to the 1980s or 1990s with the Perth group who questioned HIV and the whole AIDS scam. Because this is where this whole thing really started to blow up, was the whole HIV AIDS scam. And so this is not just for SARS-CoV-2. This is everything from herpes and herpes genitalis and SARS-CoV-2, SARS-CoV-1, MERS, you name it. Any viral particle that's been claimed to exist and cause disease has no weight in the literature. In fact, the total opposite is true. Your listeners can go read which is a book called Can You Catch a Cold by a guy called Daniel Reuters, because he used to lecture around universities in Australia teaching the same thing, just the typical medical science from the textbooks. And I don't know his personal story, but he said something similar. He said one day I just woke up and he said something was off. You just have that intuitive hunch, something's not right here. And he was teaching all this stuff. He was teaching germ theory, contagion, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, so I spent probably, again, hundreds, if not thousands of hours of actually going through the literature and reading the studies. And he wanted to find, are there contagion studies? Because this kind of comes to step 2 now. Let's just say we've presumed the virus exists. We now got to show, okay, it exists. And we can run the same experiment at 10 universities around the world and get the same result, the same virus. It definitely exists, which they haven't done. Because, by the way, there's also studies where they show we got something similar, but then we added trypsin. Now we got the spike protein. So now it looks like SARS-CoV-2. What the hell, man? You just added trypsin. You're just saying this thing exists, but you had to add a proteolytic enzyme to change its morphology to now say, oh, now it looks right. Now it looks similar to SARS-CoV-2, so we'll call that SARS-CoV-2. I mean, it's just insane some of the things they've done. But he looked for, this guy, Daniel Reuters, he looked for contagion studies. He said, surely, because we've been trying. Human beings have been trying. Humanity's been trying to show that microorganisms, one, exist, like also bacteria. Yes, they definitely exist, but also cause disease. They cause a specific set of symptoms in the human body from that agent, from that independent variable. He said, I looked, and I mean, because it's not like we haven't tried. We've been trying for over 100 years. He said, I couldn't find one. In fact, I found the complete opposite. He's put over 1,000 studies in that book. 200 are very, very tightly controlled. So there's 200 high quality, but over 1,000, because some are like, epidemiological observations. Some are maybe small sample size. So they don't have strong evidence, but it adds more weight, right? And because some people even say, things like the Spanish flu. Well, they did that. The Boston Health Department, they actually ran controlled studies. Well, they did the best possible way of natural means of showing that the Spanish flu was contagious. And anyone can read this, the Spanish flu from the Boston Health Department study. I forgot the guy that, let me just have a think real quick. The Rosenthal study. And the guys at the end of the conclusion, I mean, they tried everything. They got inmates, because it was a bit unethical. You couldn't do it today. They got prisoners to basically have healthy people and people with the Spanish flu. And they do inverse breathing. So one person would breathe while the other person inhales. I mean, they're right in front of each other's faces. Inhaling while that person exhales, sneezing on people. They do it with horses. They tried as many of the natural means as possible to get people sick. Do you want to know how many people got sick in that study?
How many?
0. So the guys concluded,
Okay.
they said, we don't know what's up. We don't know what this thing is. But this book is great. It's an easy read for your listeners if they want to start getting into, because if you think about the implications of this, it's enormous. It's not just like, oh, well, there's a big scam going on and blah. I'm not even interested in that. Think about the way that you live your life. I'm scared to be around grandma because I might make her sick. I'm scared to give my child a kiss because I could give them a cold sore and give them herpes or something. I can't have sex with my partner and I've got sexual shame because of my herpes. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of the mental distortion because of this fabricated idea that I have a, pathogenic particle inside of me and it's going to cause someone else sickness. No part of literature confirms that. In fact, it's the complete opposite.
So for our listeners, the question that they're going to be thinking right now, and the question I'm thinking is, when that happens, what's your brief explanation as to why and how a person
Symptoms
A gets
occur.
person? What was that? Sorry.
Yeah. Obviously, symptoms exist. I mean, I deal with sick people every week. To say that the sickness doesn't exist is insane. But you're right. The first question, okay, well then what is it? The first thing I want to say to that is that refutation of evidence doesn't require replacement. That's the first thing. Just because I'm going to give you an answer, but it's my speculation because I don't have the evidence. Because for the last 180 something years, we've been so focused on the germ theory that all the funding and all the studies is already wearing those glasses. They're already looking. They're doing what's called affirming the consequent. Oh, someone got sick, someone else got sick, so it must be a germ. So we're going to study the germ and we're going to ensure. So there's already kind of, you might say, because Tom jokes, he says, well, the problem with science is sometimes it's very anti-scientific. That's just the first thing, is just knowing that falsification of any hypothesis doesn't require a replacement. But I get it. Then it's irritating you. Well, what the fuck? Excuse my French. If it's not that, then what? I've got this issue and I've got this problem. Well, this starts the conversation now of a different way of looking at the body, a different way of looking at reality.
For those who don't know, what's the germ theory?
The germ theory is essentially the foundation of modern allopathic medicine. It's the idea that microorganisms exist and they cause disease. Louis Pasteur, he's kind of the founding, people refer to Louis Pasteur as the guy who pioneered germ theory. And but there are reports that even he said on his deathbed, he said, nope, He said, I falsified most of the evidence. The germ doesn't cause disease. So there's reports that now I can't confirm that, but that circulates quite a bit, that in his diaries that his son, I think, read and pressed for, he handed to, that there's accounts of him saying that. He said, my work doesn't conclude that germs cause disease, but he still continued and purported to be the germ theory guy. And that's what underpins most of medical science, is the idea that there could be a germ involved that's causing a disease. What's interesting now, though, is even in university research, it is changing. But the issue is that universities are usually on average 2 to 2.5 decades in front of medical systems. So they're still operating in the early 2000s, more or less. That's the issue that we're facing. So it is changing by all means. But if I just come back to your question, because I really want to answer this, this is what's really important to the listeners out there that may have, blisters on their vagina or their penis, and they're going, what the hell? This guy's saying the herpes virus doesn't exist. Which, by the way, I'm happy to also give you show notes. I've got a whole bunch of just basic resources that your listeners can also view. But I'd love to give as much value as I can on this podcast. The conversation I think to start that I think is most wise is, well, there's got to be a different way of looking at the body and a different way of looking at nature and how things actually work, because nature doesn't think in terms of diseases. They are human inventions. Nature thinks in terms of the laws of the universe and governing principles of nature and systems and functions, chemistry, physics, certain principles, homeostasis. So it works on principles of nature, not on man's, design. Well, it's called eczema, so therefore it must be this. Nature doesn't think that way. So the essence of true naturopathy is that exactly. How does nature work? And just observing it. End of this. Let me first address what we see as what's called an epidemiological observation, but why that can mislead you. Let's say we're both pirates and you and I go on a voyage, a ship, and we're off with 30 of our pirate friends. And one day you get a set of symptoms, bleeding gums, malaise, some of the symptoms, and you start to feel ill. And then the next day I get that set of symptoms. It was the same set of symptoms on the same time in the same location. And then the next couple of days, more pirates get the symptoms. And eventually the whole ship has the same set of symptoms. And then you get off, and then all of a sudden you start eating fruit, you realize it was scurvy, which is a vitamin C deficiency. If you were to just go by your observation, you would think that there was a microscopic particle, there's some bug, and it was causing my gums to bleed and these other symptoms of scurvy that aren't actually contagious. It was a deficiency. If you believe that just observing nature is contagion, then you would also think that Chernobyl and Hiroshima and radiation poisoning is contagious, but it's not. They're being poisoned. But it's the same set of symptoms around the same time in the same location. Common sense would also tell us that if someone got sick in the same location, the same environment, because of the germ theory, it's easy to think, oh, there's a germ. But common sense would probably ask you to go, well, what the hell is happening to the environment? What's making us sick? What's poisoning us? Right? That's usually the actual common sense, but we're being so brainwashed and indoctrinated by the germ theory, we call that an epidemiological observation. Sally got sick, then Aunt Jenny got sick, and so on. It must be a bug. So this comes back to Nami saying, I think it's wise to start looking at a different way of how nature works. Because I give the example sometimes, it's winter at the moment, we're coming out of it, slowly coming to spring. But as you know, half the trees in Australia right now and around the southern hemisphere, and even some other parts of the world, and depending on the location, have no leaves. All the leaves are turned brown. But at the point where they started to turn brown, if you imagine one tree, one leaf in one location in the southern hemisphere, one, and I mean one leaf, started to turn brown. And then 2 leaves started to turn brown. And then 3, and then 30, and then 300, and 3,000, and 300,000, 3 million, and 30 million. And all the leaves went brown and started rotting and decaying. Would you call that contagion, or just the trees going through their natural shedding process because of seasons and cycles?
Wow.
I think that's sometimes why it's colloquially called the flu season. So now this gets into the conversation now of terrain theory, or the biological terrain, the biological environment. The Sahara Desert is an environment. Cottesloe Beach is an environment. The Amazon rainforest is an environment. Antarctica is an environment. There's these things called environment, and they create ecosystems. And there's a homeostatic function of any stress that organism and ecosystem incurs, it's always trying to adapt and grow and evolve from. Now, if you think about the way that the human body works and everything you breathe in on a daily basis, you drink on a daily basis, you eat on a daily basis, you absorb mentally on a daily basis, even your emotions, those things can perturb us and they can cause symptoms. But you have to ask the question, is the symptom the illness or is it the therapy? And let me give you an example. If I overeat, if I pig my face and just overeat my calories and I eat pizza and all this gluten and I eat heaps of sugar and I have meat and dairy and I mix a whole bunch of foods and I exceed my calories and I stuff myself at an all-you-can-eat buffet and I drink alcohol and I basically poison myself, and then I'm belching and farting and have a headache and I have stomach cramping and I have constipation or the runs and I have achy joints. Is that a disease, or is it a wellness attempt and a feedback messenger from my body to let me know I ate like an idiot? And I give some of those people the example, well, that's it. And I give people also the same sort of thing. If you're in a car and you have low oil, the low oil light comes on. No one then says, I have low oil car disease. That's insane. It's a feedback to let you know there's a deficiency in your car, and your car is giving you that feedback for you to return it to a level that's optimal to increase the wellness, the longevity, and the function of that machine. And the same is true for the body. In fact, there's now over 1,000 labels of disease, and I've only come to realize that, or in my understanding, there's only 4 ways you can induce a disease. You either have a physical trauma, a toxicity, a deficiency, or an emotional perturbation, some sort of emotional, stress. That's it. And everything from eczema to cancer to ankylosing spondylitis to colitis to you name it, it falls into one of those 4 categories. If I find a 5th, I'm going to add a 5th, but I haven't found it today. So again, it's just what I'm painting at the moment is a whole new way of looking at the body. I say that the body, you are riding and driving a human supercomputer. It's a miracle of water, energy, and light, and it gives you real-time feedback to help you to maintain and the vehicle, the flesh suit vehicle, if you want to call it, and thrive. Every symptom of your psychology and physiology is ultimately a feedback to help you course correct, to get you centered, poised, present, help you become authentic, and to love. Because the emotions are part of that too. I don't really do a lot of major illness cases where there's not some major emotion involved that was actually attributing to their illness, which again, they came to realize was the therapy. They think depression is the illness. It's not, it's the therapy. People think cancer is the illness. It's not, it's the therapy. They think high blood pressure is the illness. It's not, it's the therapy. Diabetes is the therapy. So if you don't know how to interpret the body, you might think I've got a disease, because again, that's the medical industrial paradigm. But if you look at it from a different point of view, which is this whole basis of this conversation, you have information, you have feedback. That doesn't mean it's not painful. Doesn't mean it doesn't suck. Anyone that knows my story, I've been nearly dead several times. I've seen the inside of hospitals for many years. I know pain. I've got great friends, good buddy of mine. So I just chose to see the body differently and study it differently and see it differently. So now the question, if I circumvent this back to now, is if someone has blisters on their vagina or their penis, like what's up? Like if it's not a virus, then what? Well, let's just use the herpes thing, for example. And by the way, again, in the show notes, you can put this in there, but Dr. Sam Bailey, she's beautiful. She does on her website, I think it's drsambailey.com. She has a brilliant 12 to 13 minute video, I think, all on herpes, how they basically came to isolate it and show that it existed, which is a really funny laugh. And then how they also showed it was contagious. That's also an even funnier laugh. They used rabbits. You'll really laugh at that one. But I'm sure anyone that's sexually active has probably had some pretty intense sex. It's a pretty wild sex to some degree. Maybe not, but most people. And even doctors will tell you that when you're having unprotected sex, especially, you're going to cause micro tears because the amount of friction. You can imagine in a penis and vagina when there's little bodies, there's heat, there's emotions, there's sexual tension, there's chemistry, there's all those things going on. You create a lot of friction with the penis and the vagina. So imagine the inside of the vaginal wall, even the outside with the kind of the vulva, the inside of the vulva, but the actual vaginal wall all the way to the cervix, and then the shaft of the penis. Even there's lubrication and sweat. I'm sure plenty of people had enough sex where eventually you actually get a bit sore. And if you look under a microscope, because doctors have done this, they show that you actually get micro tears in the skin and there's micro bleeding. Now, you imagine the way gravity works. You know, it works down basically. It's all pulling to a center point of the earth. We're actually floating. The only reason we don't keep going in free fall is because we have an earth. There's a ground to support us, right? But technically we're always free falling towards the center, which means there's a gravitational pull. And that's why we have pressure in the body from muscles and valves to ensure that things can return, like the venous return of blood, lymphatic fluid from the calves all the way to the body to go back up. If not, we'd just basically all, be with these jelly blobs at the bottom, right? But if you think about the central trunk and where your genitals are, it's right at the midline, right at the central gravitational pull. You have heat there, which means you are more likely to dilate things like, e.g., the skin. Because remember, your skin's on a closed, this is a suit, but it's like a mesh. That's why we sweat. Anyone knows it's put a nicotine patch on, you absorb things, and we sweat and we eliminate things. I go on a sauna, you're going to sweat. Exercise, everything, you sweat. If you go long enough in a day and don't shower, you smell. So we excrete and we also consume in the skin. So imagine the skin down in your genitals when your legs are together. There's more touch, there's more heat, there's more of a dilation of the skin membranes, the dorsal layers of the skin. So you got a gravitational pull, you have vasodilation of the skin, and you have heat there. And what I believe is happening when, again, this is just speculation because I don't have the evidence, but I'd love someone to do a scientific experiment or somehow show this, that when you have high friction events like sex, everyone's got toxicity inside of them. Everyone detoxifies. We've got a detoxification system, but everyone carries certain amounts and different weights of toxicity. And I believe that sometimes when we have sexual intercourse, what's happening is when you see blisters, you're seeing protein, plasma, excess fluids, and toxicity, a translocation of toxins come down the central line because the body will find any means of excreting toxins. That's why you have eczema or pimples and anything on the skin of excreting. And under a high friction event, high heat event, when you have a central line of gravity, extreme blood flow to that area, and heat to dilate the skin, I believe that's actually what you're seeing. When you see blisters, you're seeing basically the end result of a healing process. That's why it usually takes between 3 to 5 days and up to 2 weeks to see blisters form, sores, etc., etc., etc. And then if you're mixing fluids in someone else's micro tears, it may appear that way. I'm not negating that because they might pick up on the plasma and then it's just sitting there in the skin. It doesn't necessarily mean they've caught anything, but you may be transferring fluids and some of their fluids may be coming out and then also expressing that. Because here's the thing too, Eb, what about the people who have herpes, quote unquote, have herpes, and then they have sex with their partner for 10, 20 years and they never get a symptom if it's so highly contagious? What about 2 people who test negative for HSV1, HSV2 and never get a cold sore, never get an expression of genital herpes? Because it's the same thing as, what about the kids that go to a measles party? What about them? Some got sick. What about the kids that didn't? If it's so highly contagious, why didn't everyone get sick? See, we focus on the symptom of what does manifest, but we also don't look at the population of people that don't get affected. In fact, the most hilarious part of the SARS-CoV-2 clown show was that you have the disease, but you're asymptomatic. You just said SARS-CoV-2 causes COVID with a particular set of symptoms, a particular sign of things. And now you're saying that there's a population that can be positive for the disease and carry it, but there's no symptoms. This gets into really funny, nuanced conversations, but the whole thing, in my opinion, is just pretty outlandish. So look, that's my speculation. Can I confirm that with a scientific study? No. But if I look at the way of the terrain and fluids and fats and proteins and water, the interaction of friction, microcuts, I'm just using basic common sense. So that's my, speculation of, so the herpes example. But people also, when they have a cold and flu, they don't ask, what about the food and all the shit food you ate, or the alcohol, the smoking, the drugs, the overconsumption of crappy foods and hyperpalatable foods and processed foods, and what about all the 5G in your area and the shitty water you're drinking and all the emotions, the anger and the grief and the unfulfillment and the emptiness and the sadness and the rage or the resentment and the bitterness and I could just go on and on and on. All the things that would insult a human body to go through what I believe is happening, which is a detoxification and a purification process. Think about it. Your lungs are filters. Your liver's a filter. Your spleen's a filter. Your skin's a filter. You have filters. Anyone knows with an air conditioner that blows in clean air, the reason you get clean air in the room is because the air's being filtered. And then every 6 months when you change that filter, it looks like absolute rubbish because it's been collecting that. You don't think you're breathing that all year long and eventually you're going to have a nice little purge? And by the way, we use mucus, we use gels, we use mucus to carry all that toxicity. We have an oil system and a water system. The water system's the blood. That's the Uber delivery guys. That's what feeds the cells. What about cleaning the cells? I say to people, in your water, your miracle of water, energy, and light, you got about 100 trillion 100 trillion little ebonies, 100 trillion little Mitches. So the buck stops at the cell. And then you have what's called the interstitial spaces. And the easy way to think about this is if, you took a school, the school rooms are the cells and the corridors where the students get between all the schoolrooms are the interstitial spaces. You have 2 fluids primarily, but all of your trillions of cells that bathe in, blood and lymph. One cleans, one feeds. Blood feeds, lymph cleans. And what you don't eliminate, you accumulate. And a big part of chronic illness is the accumulation of poisons and toxins and metals and plastics and pollutants and all the shit that we breathe and drink and consume physically and non-physically. Eventually your body fills up the kitchen bin and goes, fuck this, I need to clean myself because I love you and I want you to live well and thrive and do amazing things. I need to make you sick with a flu. So it gives you a fever, it heats up your gels. See, if you had a nail in a jello, when you make aeroplane jelly, when you put it in the fridge, eventually it becomes jello. That's like the gels we have in our body. It's a different type of water. It's called easy water or 4-phase water. If you wanted to get that nail out or some toxin out without scraping it in, which we'd call a surgery, and destroying the gel, you'd heat it up again, right? You'd make it liquid, you'd scoop it out, you wouldn't damage the gels, you'd recool it, back to having a structured, and you've now purified the jelly or the jello. Well, that's what a fever is. And again, medical ass backwards thinking things that stop a fever. Stop a fever? Are you insane? That's the very breakdown of your gels to loosen things up so you can get the sputum system going. You can cough and sneeze and have mucus. Because if you actually record your urine when you're sick, you'll see mucus in your urine. Sometimes people see mucus in your stool. You'll have funny smells. You're detoxifying. You're purifying your internal environment. You're weeding the garden. You're nourishing the soil. Your body will do whatever it needs to do to ensure you're achieving homeostasis. Again, that's the basics. I'm kind of going to call it there because I've given you a lot. But that's a different way of looking at the body, which is you have a miracle. God didn't make mistakes. Yes, symptoms can suck, and yes, it can hurt. But that's, what are we in a utopia that I'm supposed to just have a body and it's pleasure 24/7? That goes against the laws of the universe. Sometimes healing hurts. We all know that when you go to the gym, last piece, when you go to the gym and you stress your muscles, you do a really powerful workout to become stronger and fitter. The next day you have sore muscles, right? And you're stiff and tight and ouch. No one says I have sore muscle disease. Not even a sports physiologist would say that. They would say you're having a pro-inflammatory healing response to recover, and it's painful. So sometimes the healing is painful. I'm not negating that. I'm not negating anyone's symptoms or their distresses and their challenges. I'm not negating that. In fact, I would say to most people are delusional about the healing process. I ensure people know that they're here to earn their cure, they're here to earn their healing. And sometimes that's rough. But the human body will do whatever it can to love you, to clean you out, to purify you, to give you any sign and symptom so you can thrive. That's my base case.
Wow, that was powerful. My favorite take from this, from what you said, is that we're not born wrong. Our bodies are designed beautifully, and when supported right, they will do the right thing, and that is to detoxify and self-heal. So before I go on to asking you, Mitch, for our listeners and for myself, your favorite ways of supporting the body to heal, because I know I followed you for years and years and years on end prior to COVID on socials. I know your story. I know how you've healed, and I know all of your favorite modalities. And there's not just one, which I think in the healing space, people like to just jump onto one thing. But what I love about watching you is you bring so many different modalities in. So before we go on to that, I just want to go back to COVID as well at the same time. So there was speculations, and I want to hear your perspective on this, that the vaccine was actually what was passing the quote unquote the virus, and is what I guess made quote unquote people sick. But then two is when we do the test, what isolates the test to come up as COVID or influenza or whatever?
So there's two questions there, I think you're saying.
Yes,
One is the
yeah. So
testing.
let's go. When the test comes up, when you do the swab in your nose and you find out if you've got COVID or influenza, how do we explain that?
What's happening? So there was a guy by the name of Christian Drosten. No one will probably know this. From my understanding, he was in a WhatsApp chat with a bunch of guys. This was leaked later on when the first whole SARS-CoV-2 thing was breaking out in Wuhan. And he thought it was basically SARS-1 again, because they were being reported already, the symptoms and whatnot. I will definitely butcher some of these details, but I'll give you the base case. This guy Drosten, in this WhatsApp chat, basically thought it was SARS-CoV-1 and created what's called primers. He basically created a computer model based on nothing. So just based on the previous computer model, which was SARS-CoV-1, because they didn't isolate that one. I know that checks out. But there's basically this thing called primers and sequences that when matched at a certain threshold, because that's what the PCR does, it creates these cycles of it amplifies genetic material. So you take, a certain amount of material and you amplify it to make it bigger and bigger and bigger. And at some point, you'll either get a positive or a negative. Again, I'm not an expert, so you'd have to talk to people way smarter than me. But from my understanding, he thought it was that. So he had basically a computer model of the SARS-CoV-1 because they never isolated that. He then created a computer model to confirm that on a base case that it was similar or the same as SARS-CoV-1. And so basically he created a computer model based on a computer model to confirm a computer model. And what people were doing, and this is why there was a big stink up, is when people were getting these computer models of what they told was SARS-CoV-2, purported to be SARS-CoV-2, still never isolated it, still never found it, is they would amp up the cycle, the thresholds. I think from memory, again, don't quote me on this, it was like 31 or 32 cycles, and they were amping it up to 33, 34, 35, 36. In plain English, if you keep amplifying things, you can find anything in anything. The PCR is not a diagnostic tool. Even Kerry Mullis, the inventor of the thing, he said, do not use PCR to confirm diagnostics or diagnosis. He said that. So the own inventor said you cannot confirm diagnosis because all the PCR does is it amplifies genetic material to a certain size so then you can basically see it and confirm something or disconfirm something. It doesn't actually say, oh, I did PCR, did a swab, I got COVID positive. That means I've got COVID. That's not how it works at all. That's a complete misinterpretation of how the PCR was intended to be used. It was just intended to replicate genetic material and confirm or disconfirm things based on a certain cycle threshold. So this Drosten guy, basically, because he was kind of he's the head honcho guy, he put a thing out that he thought it was SARS-CoV-1, basically had a computer model of what that was, made basically a similar computer model, told people to run it at a certain cycle. If you got a positive, it was SARS-CoV-2, confirm that now. If not, it's a negative test. But again, there's even citations of the rate of false positives, and it's a very messy thing. But the whole PCR, in short, I need to talk to someone who's more of an expert on this. In short, is a total falsification of diagnosis of illness. It means nothing. When someone's going through a sick process, are they likely to have different genetic material or different components of what they spit out and have mucus on? Is it likely to have different debris and different protein particles of what you could pick up than a healthy quote unquote person? Of course. That's probably common sense. So it's not finding anything specific. They even say that, if you read it up, it's a non-specific test, but the specific they're looking for is based on a model that whatever the original isolates were of herpes, that's why you do the HSV1, HSV2 test, or HIV, or SARS-CoV-1, SARS-CoV-2, whatever computer model they created for that, because it's all computer model based, because again, there's no isolate. It's all inferred, it's all interpreted. And they basically make up the genome. The story of Tom Cowan, just digressing real quick, he does a brilliant job of basically showing how ridiculous the whole genome sequencing of SARS-CoV-2 was, because that's what they're running everything off, even the vaccine quote unquote technology. So to answer your question in short, one, I'm not an expert. You need to speak to someone who knows more about this. But the short of it was this guy, Christian Drosten, he was in a WhatsApp chat with a whole bunch of, medical doctors and scientists and virologists. He thought it was SARS-CoV-1. He made a computer primer model similar to that. He told people to run at a certain cycle threshold, and then the whole thing got out of control. People running cycle thresholds, north of 32 or 31 cycles, whatever it was. They were getting a whole bunch of positive tests. That's how people test positive. It's just, do you have enough of this genetic material for the test to go ping, yes, or no?
So
it's
basically
not
what
a
you're saying
diagnostic
is
tool.
everyone that's having quote unquote sickness symptoms, they're having their detox purge. Another question that's coming to my mind that
Well, just real quick
I
on that,
guess
there were people that were quote unquote sick and had symptoms and tested negative. Then they, this is again the whole clown show. People put engine oil and sheep's saliva. I've seen orange juice, all test positive for COVID. What does that tell you? And there's people that have even put sterile swabs off for testing, not even unknowingly to private research centers or testing centers, sterile swabs that tested positive for COVID. So what does that tell about its ability as a diagnostic tool? It's ridiculous.
So what was your take then during COVID time? Were you, let's just say, for or anti going and getting the COVID vaccine?
Well, I think that answer's pretty obvious. I mean, I'm anti all vaccines, not because I'm anti-vaccine. Because that's the circular reasoning, right? Because people say, oh, there's a study where vaccines work. I would question that. Again, I'm not my work, but the work of many people that research the actual literature. But that's circular reasoning. Because there's a vaccine that works, I would first ask based on what? Because you have to really get clear on what you're comparing it to. I'd say according to who and comparing to what? Because even when you do the safety controls, right, there's no saline, placebo, inert substance that they compare a vaccine to for the safety studies. It's always to another different type of vaccine. I forgot the beautiful lady. She does amazing research. She shows that all the literature showing the safety and efficacy of vaccines is also hogwash. It's so questionable. It's insane. So
Judy
I'm
Williams?
not anti-vaccine. Not Judy Mikovits. No. To Sherry Tenpenny. No, it's not her. It's someone else. Yeah, the question was I for or anti? I mean, anti for that reason. But I'm not anti-vax, because that's the thing. It's like you think I'm anti-vaccine. No, I'm just anti-science. There's no good solid evidence to show that virus exists and they cause disease. So why would I take an injection of some that has no basis in reality based on the science that they're putting forth?
I did have someone on the show a little while ago who was speaking about how when she reads she teaches parents specifically how to read manufacturer inserts. And one of the things she's found with teaching parents how to read the manufacturer insert so we can make better decisions when it comes to the childhood vaccine schedule. One of the things she has found that the easiest way I can describe it is the vaccine is what's going into the body. And then, so if a child, for example, so for someone like myself who is deciding not that they do not want to immunize our children on the vaccine schedule, you should actually protect your kids, your unvaccinated kids, from the vaccinated kids, because the vaccinated kids will actually be the ones to pass the virus and the vaccine on to unvaccinated kids.
Well, I would again say, according to who, I'd have to see a study about that. I mean, we could speculate all we want. That's why I said to you, even in my replacement, I can only speculate these things. I can't give you solid science. And by the way, just so anyone also listens too, there's something I didn't frame at the start too. It's usually the third thing I frame with a bunch of the things I said at the start is, don't believe a word I say. And if you think of this guy's the same, great. Because you also have a skeptic mind. If you're also curious, don't believe a word I say. Just go and verify it yourself, empower your choices. And that's what my usually big intention for anyone is don't believe a word I say. I have no stake in the outcome. I have no dog in the fight. I just care about people's health and wellness. And from my perspective and my lived experience is, by going down this route, you can empower yourself to ever greater degrees and not live in fear and not X, Y, Z. Now, to go to your point, that may be true in terms of they have a vaccine, they go through a detoxification process and they cough poisons onto people or they cough things in the air that maybe they pick up. I can't negate that, but at the end of the day, we're breathing in toxicity 24/7. We have really powerful detoxification systems, so I just let our detoxification systems take over. I mean, this also gets into the whole idea of the immune system, because when I briefly went over contagion, but if there's no contagion, then there's no immune system, because there's nothing to be immune to. I'm just going to say that again, just in case that if there's no contagion, then there's no immune system, because there's nothing to be immune to. That's going to bake your noodle, isn't it?
Yep, it is.
No, because people say that I want to strengthen my immune system. What are you strengthening? Now, if you said I'm strengthening my body's defense systems, which is the detoxification system, which takes any foreign or noxious material and essentially gets rid of it, well, that's a detoxification system. That's not you becoming immune to anything. You could argue there's an adaptation process, or there's a purging or a cleansing or a detoxifying process. I'm not negating that. Of course there is. So I would argue that, again, I keep things really simple. There's a regenerative process in your body, and there's a detoxification process in your body. Things are being built, things are being destroyed, both even your own cells. We have apoptosis, right? Cells die and they have to be get rid of, they have to be detoxified. Hormones are created and then they're detoxified. It's not just like you create testosterone and estrogen, it just lives in you forever. These things are created and then destroyed. They're used and eliminated. So even if anything comes into the body that's noxious, if there's no germ that causes disease, then there's no immune response. Even though we might say there's immunoglobulins and there's all these, by the end of the day, all those are proteins. Nature doesn't go, this is an immune cell. We called them that because of our idea of reality. We superimposed the model onto the world. But, and again, if you just go read a book, it's a very easy read. It's an amazing amount of citations. Can you catch a cold? Short answer, hint, no, which is crazy for most people when they hear that because they want to go, well, hold on a minute, someone got sick, then I got sick. I'm not negating that you got the symptoms. I'm just saying that the idea that someone coughed and sneezed a germ and you caught it and created the same sort of symptoms and illness doesn't hold its weight in the medical literature. We've tried. It's like we haven't tried. We've been trying over 150 years to make people sick, to control it, to show that's what happens, to do actual science as opposed to just a natural epidemiological observation. Because again, otherwise you'd say basically every tree that when they go into winter, that's all contagious. And that's insane. We don't say that. No one says that. They just say the trees are going through their shedding process, going through the seasons and the cycles. So just to finish up that last point was, because you said, parents saying they want to protect their unvaccinated kids from the vaccinated kids because they could be spreading the virus and the vaccine. I would submit, one thing we'd even address is the whole fear component. Everyone's worried now about germs and this and probably there's a whole thing we could work on of fear. I would submit your body's far more powerful than you probably even think about it. That's number one. Give yourself more credit than you're probably even giving yourself credit for. The idea is you don't want to wrap yourself in cotton wool and protect yourself from the world because then you're like a wet rag that's going to be, blown by the first gust of a wind. You want to build resilience, which is when people say also build their immune system, what they're saying is get adequate nutrients, live an inspired life, have loving relationships, work on the fulfillment of your life, live by priority, ensuring you're honoring the magnificence of you, living an inspired life, living purposefully, having nutritious foods, empowering all the areas of life, feeling like an empowered being, and also not being fearful of these things. Because sometimes your body may need to purge. Why do we keep saying it's sickness versus a cleanse or a purge? The moment I get a scratchy throat and a runny nose, it might be, once a year or something, I go, great, thank God I'm cleaning my filters out. Otherwise, that's going to keep accumulating in my body and I'm going to add even more illness down the road. Because make note of this, what you don't eliminate, you accumulate. It's not like Jesus Christ just comes in and magically, poof, gets rid of the toxicity. It's there in your body. If your body cannot eliminate waste, any noxious substance or something out of the body, you're going to have some sort of perturbation that you're going to knock it out of homeostasis. There's going to be some sort of symptom. And stress can affect that because when you're highly distressed, you get muscular tension, your cortisol goes up, kidney function starts to drop slightly, your muscles are more tight, fluid doesn't flow as well. You usually don't breathe as optimally, which means your diaphragm's not pumping all your gut lymphatic fluid and moving the waste through your system. I mean, the nervous system and the lymphatic system work part and parcel. They're like peas and carrots, brother and sister. So I don't think it's anything to say you should be fearful of kids that have vaccines and them spreading and shedding. I'm not negating that could be a thing, most of the vaccine part, not so much the virus, because that doesn't exist as far as I'm concerned. But empower yourself. Don't be fearful. Empower yourself to become more resilient and adaptable and embrace all the supports and the challenges of life. In case you didn't work, life's a jungle. It's going to have pleasures and pains, supports and challenges. So it's wise to embrace those things and build defenses and resilience and adaptability, emotional stability, keep the autonomics regulated and functioning optimally, keep your skin clean, keep your bowels moving, keep your kidneys working, your adrenals online, make sure you breathe well, you live well, prioritize your life, honor who you are, love who you are. That to me is going to give you the highest probability of living with wellness and living with vitality. Because you can have the best diet, blueberries blessed by the Dalai Lama, but if you don't love who you are and you're shaming how you struggle to love yourself and you're trying to get rid of half of yourself and you're not integrating your shadow and all of your pieces and basically hating up on yourself, you can have the healthiest diet and still feel like shit and be unhealthy, so to speak. So that's why, the true essence of holistic health is mind, body, spirit. And just to kind of bring that all home, I wouldn't be fearful of those types of things. I would just be strengthening my human system to the greatest degree.
Amazing. Before we really go into your takes and your tips on how our listeners can be healthy within themselves and raise healthy children. I do just want to have one more question about the COVID thing because it's just on the forefront of
Yeah,
my
please. Yeah,
mind. There was
that's
also
fine.
speculation that I read and saw a lot of that COVID and the symptoms we were seeing was actually our body detoxing from the rollout in 5G towers that also happened that year. From your understanding, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a great book, The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Firstenberg. It's a big read. I haven't read all of it. I've read snippets, but you can always go to ChatGPT and summate that. We've got a great technology now called ChatGPT, so you can summate the findings. But this guy, Arthur Firstenberg, he writes on the electrification of the earth and radiation poisoning. By the way, it is true that a lot of the symptoms that people were experiencing were very, very similar to radiation poisoning. Do I believe that COVID was 5G in its totality? Absolutely not. Do I believe that it played some part in the symptoms people are experiencing, which are very akin to radiation poisoning? And especially, again, see, if you have a defense system that the body can adapt because you're resilient, you have regulated autonomics, you have, more robustness, you've addressed nutrient deficiencies, you're a really strong human being on a cellular level type thing, you're likely would have handled that without any symptoms. But if you were old or young, had poor detoxification pathways or elimination pathways, maybe you had high levels of distress, lots of anxieties, nutrient deficiencies, came from a country where maybe those conditions weren't as right, and then you have a whole bunch of non-native electromagnetic fields come into your body, could that be another distress that's resulted in your body going through a purge? Absolutely. But the Invisible Rainbow does a really great job of showing the effects of non-native electromagnetic fields. Because the reality is you're getting bombarded by them every day. It's called the sun. You have electromagnetic fields hitting you every day. It's the non-native ones at certain frequencies that can be deleterious. There is great research on the effects of 5G. There's obviously counter arguments. I speculate. Again, I'm of the same thought process that I kind of said before. There's no need to live your life every day going, oh my God, where's the 5G towers? I'm going to live in fear. Because how paradoxical that now you're stressing your system, you have intrusive thoughts, your autonomics are jacked up, you have sympathetic dominance, you have hypervigilance, your system starts to shut down, you paradoxically reduce your rate of regeneration and healing, you reduce detoxification pathways because you're so cynically focused on one stress that's coming to your body. But some people get really affected? Yeah, but that's why they have, they have protective clothing now, you have protective paint, protective curtains. I mean, you can 5G protect your house if that's really important to you. But again, I would just submit that if you believe that you're going to be killed by 5G, you increase the probability of that happening. If you believe that you're a powerful, human being of the universe or God or source, Mother Nature, you can call it what you will, and you're a miracle of water, energy, and light, you're driving a supercomputer and you're a robust, resilient machine that nothing can hurt you, so to speak. I'm using that used loosely. Then you probably have a greater probability of being resilient to the non-native electromagnetic fields and any toxicity or toxic insult. So to answer your question, do I believe it played some part? Yes. Do I believe that's what was COVID? Probably not. I think that's a bit of a stretch. Because if you actually look at the data, and Tom did a great job with this, there was no excess mortality. But again, also too, what about the propaganda machine of the fear of the masses that drove up their illness? Look at the nocebo effect. I mean, that's well established, as well as the placebo effect. I give you a sugar pill for an allergy, your allergy goes away. What the hell's going on? It was an inert substance. Well, it had an effect. But what about the 24/7 propaganda machine that was driving fear through people, which was exposing them to being a weakened state? So they could have had more toxins and poisons. The very same environments, now they're less resilient to, which could have jacked up illness and temporary acute hospital visits. But that never actually happened. There's no great supportive data I found that showed there was excess mortality. But even if there was, you still just can't affirm the consequent, oh, more people got sick, therefore a virus, or therefore 5G. You have to do science. Like, if people want to make statements, they have to back it up with some meat and potatoes. That's why if I make any claim, I'm going to say, look, this is my speculation. I can be confident of this based on this. Or there's been a whole range, thousands of anecdotes, so it carries some weight, but I can't be sure. I'm not going to spout bullshit and say it's this, this, and this if I have no data to back it up. Because even when people have data to back it up, as you know, there's pro data and anti data. Even then, you've got to start sifting through that. The damage from 5G and then the safety of 5G and the eggs are good and eggs are bad, right? I mean, that was the whole smoking thing for 15 years because of the propaganda machine. Doctors were saying smoking's good for you, and they knew smoking was terrible for you, but you suppressed that for years. There's a whole propaganda machine suppressing that. But initially, there was people going back and forth, going, it was harmful. Then people saying, no, it's not harmful at all. So even when there is data, you got to go back and forth, let alone not having any data. So I can't speculate. I can't say yes or no. But that would be my confident speculation and best guess is that, did it have some part of it? I would submit yes. Because from my understanding, even talking to some telecommunication engineers, the way that some of the towers emit their non-native electromagnetic fields, they can have definitely deleterious effects to cellular structures, without a doubt. They're confident of that, but I can't give you any more than that. That's all.
So, Mitch, let's get on to healing. Something that you went and did lately. I haven't actually gotten your full story of it, but I did see you went to Bali and you completed a dry fast. So, for our listeners who aren't aware of what a dry fast is, are you able to describe what it is and why you did it and why you believe in fasting?
Okay. Yeah, so if you thought water fasting was intense, try dry fasting. I'm laughing because I remember the first time I heard about dry fasting and I was reading about it. I was reading an article and the work of Dr. Filanov. And I remember rolling my eyes going, I literally rolled my eyes and went, you've got to be shitting me. So this is the same as the virus thing, and there's no viruses. Yeah, well, how stupid, how dumb. That's just some dumb YouTube tinfoil hat contrarian thing. How stupid before I looked into it. Same thing for dry fasting. I thought, you got to be insane until I looked at it. I kept getting pulled back to it. So essentially a dry fast is exactly how it sounds. There's no food and no water, whereas water fasting would be abstinence from food, but obviously unlimited water that you can handle and tolerate. Is there anything specific you want to know, or do you want to just kind of go to town on the whys, the what's, the what's happening?
I really want to get an overview of all the healing modalities that you do like. So maybe not to town, maybe just if we can
Yep.
surface level over it and then go on to all of the other healing
Yes.
modalities that you use in your life.
Yes, because I did sense that you want to go over the healing as an overarching conversation, but then you went to the dry fasting, so that's why I just wanted to clarify that. I define healing as anything that can help you return to a sense of balance and wellness. Because sometimes we hear the word healing and people interpret it in different ways. But to me, you can have a healing if you're deficient in protein or keratin or elastin or collagen, because if your skin can't heal properly because you've got a deficiency of the actual building blocks, well, then healing I define could be that. Or it could be the grief from you divorcing your ex-wife and ex-husband, and the healing is you alchemizing that grief to have love and be free from the mental anguish of the grief. So anything that's helping you balance the mind, balance the body, and come back to the center point, the mean, the centered, poised, present, powerful, loved, grateful, inspired, not too much, not hypo, the middle path, which is love and gratitude and inspiration, enthusiasm. It's presence, it's a balance, the mean, the middle path. That's what I define as healing. So my quest when I started discovering the healing arts was anything that could help me return to the middle path, return to the center, return to helping the deficiencies become adequate or the excesses become adequate, or pull them down to become adequate, anything I get my hands on. So I've done a range of healing things from anything from, plant medicine and mushrooms and San Pedro and some of the ancient medicines to breath work, to Reiki, to spinal energetics, to fasting, juice fasting, water fasting, intermittent fasting, which I don't really call fasting, to dry fasting, you name it, I've done quite a bit. I can't say I've done it all. I mean, even herbs you could argue help on the healing. So I've done plenty of herbs. I sort of start there. I define anyone that's on the healing journey, because sometimes that's a trap for unworthiness. Sometimes people go on the healing journey because they're actually trying to seek something beyond themselves. Healing is not a journey to get something necessarily. For me, it's to experience a state of being. Because we all know that when we're deficient in something, we feel it. Like if you're iron deficient, you can barely breathe, you've got dark circles, you might go pale skin, you have low energy, right? It's an experience. So the healing in that is changing your state of being. Like I said, back to that middle path, to wellness and vitality. There's 1,000 ways to skin a cat. Because when someone says, what do I need to help with my healing? I'm going to say, I don't know. That's why I say, sometimes the healing journey is walking into Baskin and Robbins and licking all 34 flavors to find out what works for you. Sometimes that is the healing journey, is to go off and have fun. What an amazing experience that you get to go on, dance on this planet and find out ways to nourish and, address some of the issues you're having with your body, and to love more deeply and expand, and to break through some of the mental anguishes and the intrusive thoughts or the anxiety, the depression. I mean, what an amazing gift we get to go explore those things. I know they're challenging as shit. I'm not negating that. But I'd rather people be inspired by their healing journey than fear themselves, because that's the common thing, right? Especially in the medical world. You have a disease. If you don't do this and you don't do this, you're either going to live a life of hell and you're going to die. You're going to have to cut an organ out. And it's fear, which paradoxically jacks up the issue. So I say to people, be inspired by your healing journey. You don't have to, you get to. Empower your choices of you get to. Now, what is it that I need for my healing journey? You're not going to like the answer. I don't know. As I say, go try it. Or, if I had my time again, I would say find a mentor who knows, excuse my French again, knows what the fuck they're talking about. Actually embodies, has results from hundreds, if not thousands. They live and breathe their work. They get the results. They know what they're talking about. And I mean that in a humble sense. Of course, I'm never going to stop learning. And there's plenty of brilliant healers around the world that they're going to say, I'm a student of the world. In fact, the more I know, the less I know. is that would be my first piece of advice, because it can be very confusing. Go, what do I do for my healing? And sometimes even going down a healing path that may not actually be right for you. Maybe you just have an iron deficiency and you think you've got having some existential crisis, or you think it's some past life regression thing. And it's just like, man, you just need to have more iron or address some of your intestinal inflammation. I don't know. Generally, we do gravitate. I do have a hunch that generally we do gravitate towards people where the healing is relevant for our journey. I say you can't mess it up, because all roads lead to Rome. Maybe you did need to spend 20 years of quote unquote wasting time before you found the healing modality that worked for you, because maybe you actually weren't ready for that one. Maybe it is juice feasting for 60 days. Maybe it is a 21-day water fast. Maybe it is a 9-day dry fast. Maybe it's a cup of ayahuasca or 10 breathwork sessions. I don't know. So I just want to address that a little bit first. I think for anyone listening that has got a chronic illness is keep exploring, keep your holy curiosity, and keep your hope, because there is a lot of misinformation out there. And sometimes when you try something, you pay $5,000 or $1,000, even $300, and you don't get a quote unquote result, it can be disheartening. So to keep your holy curiosity and to keep your hope, because sometimes they're the very things that keep you going. I know when I was dying in bed, literally dying. I was losing 2 to 2.5 kilos a week. I was shitting blood 40 times a day. I was just emaciated, and I was sometimes literally fainting from low hemoglobin and low blood pressure. So I know for myself that keeping my hope, and no matter what was happening, I would still keep a sense of hope that there was something out there that could help. I think when it comes to your actual healing process, if I'm being practical, there's sometimes an expression that is, if you're not assessing, you're just guessing, because sometimes it is a physiological issue to address. So maybe you do need a blood test just to see what your physiology looks like. Get your pathology read by someone who knows what the hell they're talking about when it comes to your blood work, and they can maybe give you some powerful information and knowledge to address some of those excesses or deficiencies. Maybe it is to see a really powerful healer, because they can be, help you with your anxieties, or they know about, for myself, I'm trained in applied psychology and human behavior. So I would submit if it's a mental health thing, if it's chronic anxiety and chronic fear and chronic grief and chronic, debilitating trauma, that's where, someone like myself would be probably wise. I would submit, go find yourself a Demartini Method facilitator, someone who is very well versed in applied psychology, knows why these things occur, at least to a very foundational reason, and is not just guessing, and has the tools to help you overcome them. Maybe you're super dehydrated and you're full of acid, and 60 days on highly hydrating, high chlorophyll greens juices is really going to help you. Maybe your adrenal glands are shot, and some licorice root and Siberian ginseng and some adaptogens are really going to nourish your adrenals. Maybe your healing comes from realizing you've been living from mum and dad's expectations and subordinating to them or outer authorities, and not claiming your own life and feeling unfulfilled. And a lot of your illness comes from being unfulfilled. And so your healing journey may be reclaiming your power and reclaiming your value and reclaiming your worth. So to come back to what I said at the start, I don't know. All roads lead to Rome. That's the beautiful quest that people get to undertake when they go on their healing journey, which is discover what are some of the pains and the issues I'm having in my life, and how can I overcome them to the greatest degree to feel like I'm expanding, or I'm coming to a place of greater wellness and vitality and inspiration and love and gratitude in my life. Because sometimes I've seen people that have illness because of a learned pattern recognition. They got more benefits to being sick. All they learned in terms of getting attention and sympathy and affection was to be ill. So I have to go in there and I have to basically, break down part of their subconscious psyche and help them realize that part of their strategy of their illness was actually to help them love themselves and not be validated through other people's existence. And that the best strategy that they learnt, so it's not being shamed, it's understood and appreciated, was that they actually created pain and symptoms of illness to get what they wanted. It was a strategy as a young child or a teenager. And it basically helped them remyelinate the brain, and their healing journeys to learn how to love them, appreciate themselves, and individuate and go on an amazing pathway there. So I hope that helps and paints a little bit of I wanted to kind of address the aspects to healing, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. I certainly definitely experienced that. And that's why I do what I do with Nirvana Health and bringing true holistic intervention and a multidisciplinary approach, and giving people the options to choose, and not just see, because if you're a chiropractor, right, you're kind of looking at the lens through chiropractic. If you're a medical doctor, you're looking at the lens through medical issues. If you're a naturopath, you may be looking through it through naturopathy and the way you've been trained. If you're a herbalist, everything is to be addressed through herbs. So, if all you have is a hammer, then everything's a nail, right? And that's why I wanted to step back and I wanted to study the healing arts. Who were the greatest healers? What were the greatest healing modalities? And bring into kind of one compendium of wisdom, which empowers people to choose what intuitively is, resonating, that's true for them. If I'm speaking more specifically on some of the fasting, the things that I've seen, the healing that I've seen that's worked to the greatest degree, there is no doubt in my mind the Demartini Method, which helps people experience more love and gratitude and certainty and presence and inspiration, and helps them clear the subconsciously stored baggage in their mind that's weighing them down and causing illness. There's no doubt in my mind, for me personally, I probably have a bit of a bias, but based on what I've seen and worked with now thousands of people, that is the most powerful tool I've seen for transcending judgments and overcoming illness when it comes to emotional distresses. Everything else, as far as I'm concerned, is fighting for second. But are there amazing things that have their place? Absolutely. The second, I would say, it comes back to the fasting component, but it depends on where you're at Because if you're emaciated and you're, got cachexia from muscle wasting and chemotherapy from cancer, dry fasting probably ain't for you. Everything's again is a tool. How do you use it? If you're already highly distressed and your adrenals are shot, even water fasting probably is not for you. So the healing journey is really asking, where am I at? What got me to this point in my human experience to be feeling and experiencing my mind and my body like this? And really get clear on what, not the label, ulcerative colitis and eczema. Forget the label. What's your symptoms? What are you experiencing on both a psychological and a physiological level? Because the clearer you are with that, the actual clarity of what's going on and giving yourself more credit to actually understand what's going on in your body. So you're present and not, because some people just dissociate out of it, but they don't even connect to their body, because I certainly wasn't. To actually connect and cultivate intimacy with yourself, that alone usually gives people way more clarity with their direction of what's going to help them in their healing journey. I think that's a big part. But if I'm just coming back now to the last bit of this, because we did start with the dry fasting, and most people even haven't heard of that. I think it was pretty crazy. I certainly did. Most people heard of water fasting. Most people heard of juice fasting. They certainly have their place for different reasons. But in short, dry fasting was pioneered by the Russians, more or less. I mean, it kind of started with nature, right? But the actual pioneering medically done. Because it has been run in medical clinics for nearly 70 years now. Started majorly in the USSR with Russian professors. And mostly the gastroenterology unit, a lot of the digestive illnesses. They're working on that. But sometimes brain issues and sometimes, spinal cord issues and sometimes nervous system issues and infections, quote unquote infections. But essentially it's a process of not eating any food, abstaining from food and water. And you might think that's crazy. You need the kidneys need to flush fluids and all that kind of stuff. That's a half truth. But there's a bigger reason as to why we dry fast. One of those reasons is in the absence of water, you have to make your own metabolic water to maintain homeostasis. And in order to do that, anyone knows that the basic molecular structure of water is 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen. What's the greatest availability of hydrogen in your body? Fat tissue. You rapidly accelerate fat because of the law of efficiency. You actually preserve more muscle than on a water fast. It's very inefficient to get water and energy out of muscle. It's very, very efficient to get water and energy out of fat. Well, at least the hydrogen, because you breathe the oxygen, you can make your own water, H2O. So that's the first part. It accelerates the adipose burning, the fat tissue burning, and therefore the toxicity, the detoxification process quite quickly. Because of that process, you also enter ketosis and start burning ketone bodies a lot faster because you accelerate the rate of fat burning. It's called the beta oxidation. So you increase the rate of also getting into ketosis faster. My understanding so far from some of the research is you also stimulate to a greater degree stem cells and growth hormone and some of these growth factors at a faster rate. It is a bigger stress, there's no question. That's why the most important thing is to convalesce and rest and do absolutely nothing. Be nothing, do nothing, say nothing, do nothing, be no one. Rest, 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 rest. So let the body take over. Some of the other benefits, because of the biofilm / bacterial / infection component, is those microorganisms, even though they're not causing the diseases, because they're living inside of you, they too have to eat and eliminate. So some of the issue and the reason as to why sometimes having excess microorganisms in you is because they're living in you, which means they're pooping in you. So even their waste is coming in you. So by deterring them out with no water, you kind of quote unquote starve them, you dehydrate them, you starve them. And some of the extra processes that go in the body is help eliminating the microorganisms because of the food they're eating, which is your biofilms and all the excess crap. So you're essentially accelerating water fast. It's kind of called water fasting on steroids. The process of autophagy and autolysis and apoptosis, the cellular dying and recycling and cleaning processes of the human body are vastly accelerated with a dry fast. You're making your own metabolic water. You're increasing adipose fat burning or adipose tissue, the burning of fat tissue. You're preserving muscle mass to a greater degree. And you're essentially incinerating the body. It's an extreme stress, but the weaker cells are the only ones that really get affected. The stronger ones basically adapt. There's more I could say on that, but I don't want to go too far into it. It gets a bit too convoluted and complex. And there's even still things I'm learning about it. But after doing it several times now, and after watching several people, I am absolutely convinced that dry fasting is far more powerful than water fasting, but it depends on the context of who you are and is it right for you. It's not for everyone, especially the people that can't actually produce ketone bodies. There's genetic polymorphisms, people that can't adequately produce ketone bodies. It's not for them. The sick and the weak, the cachexic, the muscle wasting disease, it's not for them. It's not for everyone. So it's a tool. It's a very powerful tool. Those two tools for the physiology and the psychology, the mind, body, spirit, the Demartini Method and dry fasting, in my opinion, are two of the most powerful healing techniques I've ever seen on the planet. And I've seen miracles worked on those two things.
So what is the Demartini Method?
That's a great question. The Demartini Method is a series of questions to help you become conscious of what you're unconscious of. Let me give you an example. You're driving in a car and you go to change lanes. I'm sure all your listeners and you yourself and myself, we've had an experience where we're driving in a car and you got to change lanes and there's someone in your blind spot. And it's only until you're basically shifting lanes and then all of a sudden you get this, and you kind of get oh my God, there's someone there, right? It could be a motorbike or just a car you just didn't even see. They're in your blind spot. Now, they were always there. You just didn't see it. So the Demartini Method is helping you seeing what you're not seeing, help you become conscious of what you're unconscious of so you become fully conscious or return to the superconscious state. In the superconscious state is where you have love and wisdom. When you have emotions, ecstatic or traumatic, liked or disliked, happy or sad, joy or sorrow, angry, content, it's like a seesaw. We have the positive emotions and the negative emotions. Both are perturbations, or you might say stresses from homeostasis, which is again where wellness and healing and vitality is maximized. Because people think, I want the positive. I'm sure you've had an experience where you've been highly infatuated with a guy, or if you're a guy, highly infatuated with a girl, and when you're dating them in the first few weeks or so, you're getting anxious. You're waiting for them to text you. When's he going to text me? Right? You get anxious. There's a kind of a fear of loss of them, and then you hope that they kind of text you, and you sacrifice yourself to them. You do weird shit, and you kind of have a dysmorphia. You say weird things. You say things to please them. That's distressful. It's distracting. You can't even focus at work because you're thinking of them all day. That's actually distressful. So having too much pleasure and positives in your mind is a distress. Having too many negatives in your mind is a distress. Most people are used to that one. But I help people with also their ecstatic memories because they can affect it. I once had, just a real quick story, I once had a guy who couldn't be present when he was making love to his partner because he was still thinking of his ex-girlfriend's butt. Her ass. He said, I need help. I can't get it out of my head. I feel terrible because I love my partner, but I'm stressed because every time I'm having sex with my partner, I'm thinking of my ex-girlfriend's butt. So I help people with their ecstatic and their pleasurable memories because if they don't resolve them, like this example, if you go into a new relationship, you're going to be comparing the new partner to your ex-partner. That's going to be distressful. It's going to have internal conflicts. So I clear both. The Demartini Method is helping you balance your perceptions to maximize health, healing, integration, and help you experience love and wisdom. It helps you be inspired. It helps you become authentic. See, because when you're highly infatuated, you minimize yourself. You can't be authentic there. You put them up on a pedestal. You're highly infatuated. You've got all this pleasure. They're up on a pedestal. You kind of worship them, and now you're devaluing yourself in the process. So you can't feel authentic there. You can't love yourself there. You can't even have true love in the relationship because you're looking up. See, in order to look into the soul, the window to the soul is the eye, right? You need to be looking across. But if they're above you, you're looking up to them. You can't look into them. So you can't access the soulmate. If you're highly resentful, let's say you're with them now for 10 years, they're your wife or your husband, and you probably had some stuff going in that relationship. And at times you now resent them. Now you're looking down on them. You also can't get access to the soul and have love and respect and intimacy because you're resenting them. Now you're proudful and cocky and arrogant looking down on them. So anytime we have infatuations and resentments, anytime we have shames and prides, we are having dysmorphias of ourself or other people. And in that state, we're going to have a reverberation of noise, intrusive thoughts, anxieties and depressions and angers and bitternesses and griefs and all these types of emotions we experience because of our imbalanced perceptions. And we have imbalanced perceptions because of our unconscious information that we're missing. It's that motorbike in the blind spot. And the Demartini Method is helping you become conscious of what you're overlooking, which balances your perceptions, helps you become authentic, helps you develop more intimacy and love and connection and experience love and gratitude and have wisdom. So it's balancing the mind to open the heart. You cannot have an open heart with an imbalanced mind. The mind and the body work like one. A balanced mind opens the heart. An imbalanced mind closes the heart. And when I work with people with the Demartini Method, I usually take them, especially the more resentful cases, but I do work with the other, infatuations and attachments and all that. I work with that too. That's very important. But let's just take a typical example. You're having relationship issues and you're highly resentful of your partner and you feel your heart closed. I'm sure every listener can relate that in a relationship, they felt armored in their heart or closed or they're shut off intimately, communicatively, sexually, relationally, some form of that. We felt closed off. It's because we've got in our mind an imbalanced ratio of perception going on. There's a distortion in our mind as a judgment in our mind. And it's our judgments that close the heart. But it's pretty normal. We're going to judge the day we die. So please don't we all judge. That's part of the human experience. But if we don't learn our lessons and dissolve our judgments and address some of our perceptions, that can keep running us. It runs our life. And then we stay mad. We stay resentful. We keep the armor up. We stay closed, and that can disempower us or limit us. So I help people balance their mind. I help them open the heart. I help them see what they're not seeing, become conscious of what they're not conscious of, experience, healing, because once you balance your perceptions, see, when you're highly resentful, you have the sympathetic response, right? I'm angry. How dare they do that? And your charge, your jaw tightens, your trap tightens, your neck tightens, your breathing tightens, it's shallow. So you're having an effect on your physiology, which means you're dampening the healing response. You're actually creating illness. So the Demartini method, when I help you balance your perception and calm some of the resentment and calm some of your pride and help you have love, the healing's maximized because now your autonomics, your whole physiology comes back into balance. You improve heart rate variability. You're relaxing the whole intracardiac network. Muscle tension looses. The intrusive thoughts start to quieten. You have a clear mind. The heart's opening to love. You want to embrace the people you were once resenting. I've sometimes had people highly resentful and in 40 minutes wanting to, in tears of grace, wanting to reach out and hug that individual and embrace them. So it's very, very profound. It helps people awaken their mind, return to the superconscious state, experience love and wisdom, open the heart, and bring healing to the mind and the body. It's a very, very, very powerful technique. It's a series of questions to help you return to the superconscious state to experience all those things I've just mentioned, the love and the wisdom and the certainty and vitality and presence. It's very powerful.
It kind of sums it up, doesn't it? Like just when you explained when you feel a certain way towards somebody, your jaw, your shoulders, everything changes. And that I'm just picturing, generations before us who um, don't know and haven't got the tools. Like, we're so grateful that we have all these tools now in our reach because of the internet and because of social media. I love that about social media. I love that about this platform and podcasts and stuff. But generations before us didn't have that, so I guess that's passed on. And when you start getting into German new medicine and, I guess the sickness or the disease that you're seeing is actually an emotional response to the body's way of healing, it really starts to make sense.
Yes. This you just said it perfectly. I used to study a bit of German new medicine as well. I have a couple of facilitators who are German new medicine practitioners. So there's a lot of commonalities there. But again, that's a whole different way of looking at the body, right? The emotional conflict adaptation response versus you have a disease, it's an entity, you basically caught it, it's autoimmune, we don't know what caused it, here's your drugs, we'll see you in 3 months. It's a very different way of looking at the body. And that's why at the start I was mentioning that kind of paradigm shift. It's a whole different way of looking and even embodying the way that you live and breathe and live out your life. It's a very, very empowering way to be. And I would love to, because that's what I love speaking on is universal laws or principles in human behavior, applied psychology, and the Demartini method. It's profound what I've seen and had the privilege and the honor of helping people overcome. I mean, some of the stories are just, your jaw would drop if you heard some of the stories I've got to share on this stuff, but it's profound. And I'm very grateful that I have the opportunity. And like you said, we're very blessed that we have these tools today. Yeah, it's very inspiring. So I'm more than happy, round 2 in the sea container in the studio. And we have to pop out a applied psychology, human behavior, maybe relationships and sex and the Demartini method.
Mitch, that's us for today. For anyone that wants to reach out and work with you, how do they do so?
Well, I run a community. It's in soft launch at the moment because I'm still collating, again, the wisdom and the knowledge from some of the greatest healers in the minds on the planet. There's a lot of modules to get through to empower people in their health, their healing, and their self-development quests. That's the Nirvana Health community. You can go there. It's nirvanahealth.co, not .com, but .co. So nirvanahealth.co, C-O. And you can join the community. It's still in soft launch, but it's $89 a month. It's less than a cup of coffee a day. I want to make it the number one holistic health community in Australia. I like to say the world, but I definitely have my mission set up for that. That's my intention. And I want to provide people with the tools, the things that have helped me build my body from basically death, like a skeleton, rebuild my body to thrive and be well, and help others do the same. Give them that empowerment, make it affordable. That's the Nirvana Health community. So you can check that out. I'm also available for private consulting. My fees aren't cheap, but I can't see the amount of times I've had people say, I've spent 20 years in a psychologist's office and what you just did in 2 hours, I've spent $30,000. You just did it for 100 times less and saved me a lot of time. I hear that quite often. So you can work with me privately. That is an option. You'll find me on Instagram and it's just my name, Mitchell, double L, and then Vickridge is Vickridge. I'm sure that'll be in the show notes, primarily on Instagram. Aiming to have a YouTube channel by the end of this year, if not 2026. But otherwise, I'm just going full time on the Divine Health community. I really want to make that wildly available for people to access this knowledge, decide for themselves, empower themselves, and really become their own best healer. It was Hippocrates said, if you're not your own doctor, you're a fool. And I want to really empower people because universal law states that any area of your life you don't empower, someone else will overpower. My mission and what I'm inspired by is to empower people in their health, to really empower in all parts of their life. Because if you empower your health, you can empower other parts of your life. You can empower your relationships. You can empower your business. You can empower your finances. You can empower all of your intimate relationships and your family dynamics, your spirituality, your mental genius and creativity and innovation. So that's what lights me up. and that's the Nirvana Health community. We got an every week on calls. There's an amazing amount of content. I have a whole protocols page for every imaginable disease you can imagine, and ways to help you overcome and heal from this and reclaim your power.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.